And later on this morning, we'll hear from President Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. The pair will address the media at 11:15 Eastern from the Rose Garden. Their meetings last night and today are largely focused on how to curb the nuclear threat from North Korea. Margaret Brennan joins me now from the White House. So, Margaret, President Moon had said earlier on, while he was campaigning, that he's in favor of a diplomatic solution, that he's willing to engage Kim Jong-un. But the Trump administration has called for tougher sanctions and isolating North Korea. What are both sides hoping to achieve with the meetings?
Well, the images that you saw last night when the president arrived here and that you'll see today when the two allies stand side by side is aimed at showing that they are on the same page, that the U.S. continues to be a devoted military ally who is positioned to defend South Korea against this threat, and is also keenly aware that North Korea is rushing towards this development of a nuclear-tipped missile that could soon hit U.S. territory. So this is supposed to send the signal of a united front, but as you point out, there are differences of opinion on how to get to that goal of getting the North to give up its weapons, or at least to stop being so provocative. And what you have seen is, it's always a matter of regional and local politics. Moon, who is the new leader of South Korea, was elected on a much more dovish platform, so to speak, than his predecessor, who took a very hard line. His predecessor, Park Geun-hye, who was the first female president of that country, was taking a position: we're not going to negotiate. The North needs to give up its weapons. I'm not going to sit down at a table and offer them any kind of aid until they are willing to buckle on this issue. Moon said, "I'm not her." He ran in opposition to that platform, saying we should have some sort of peace treaty and negotiation and a settlement. The Trump administration, on the other hand, ran on the position of we're not Obama, strategic patience is over, and that means forcing the North to the table. So while they both share the same perceived threat and the same end goal, they disagree on how to get there. And the Trump administration, you heard from National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster that this threat is way too immediate to go into lengthy negotiations. They are open to negotiations, but they are upping the ante on the pressure to make leader Kim Jong-un sort of buckle under it and agree to make some concessions. Not clear if that's going to pay off either.
Yeah, right. Looming in the background is China. China a little upset today because the U.S. has slapped new sanctions on a Chinese bank that the U.S. is accusing of laundering money for North Korea. And earlier this month, President Trump actually made a suggestion that China's efforts to rein in North Korea had failed, that they had tried, but it just wasn't working out. How does all of this factor into Mr. Trump's negotiations with South Korea's president today?
Well, it's yet another complication here. Look, we expect over the next few days President Trump to travel to the G20 summit, where he will likely encounter China's president and have to talk about this in some form or fashion as well. But what you've heard from the president recently is some frustration that while the U.S. wants to make China part of the solution, they don't think they are cutting off the North in a way that makes it financially painful for them, basically makes it too costly to continue its missile and nuclear program. So that's likely going to be another reason that the president is going to push this harder line when he speaks again today with President Moon. What we know from those sanctions that were announced yesterday by the Treasury Secretary is this is the kind of thing that, while the U.S. is going to great pains to say, look, our problem's not with China, our problem is with the guy you're helping in North Korea. Stop being their patron. Stop propping him up. Stop facilitating financial transactions for him and the leadership of the country. That is getting the U.S. into sort of a tougher position here in upping the pressure on Beijing in a way that makes them uncomfortable potentially. So this is really a complicated game of chess, Anne-Marie, and by upping those sanctions, the U.S. the Trump administration is sending a signal here that if Beijing doesn't move with us, the U.S. will move alone.
Right. Speaking of a relationship that's complicated and looking ahead to next week, the White House announced that President Trump will be meeting with Vladimir Putin next week at the G20 summit in Germany. This is the first time the two leaders are actually going to be meeting face to face. The National Security Advisor says that there's no planned agenda. But what have you learned about this meeting?
Look, to call this highly anticipated is to grossly understate how much this is going to be scrutinized from the body language, that is if we even get a photo or any access to this encounter, to the substance itself. And that's the thing. This is really a moment of opportunity. Russia says they want this to be about resetting relations and bringing them back from that Cold War era low. We heard Secretary of State Rex Tillerson spoke to Russia's top diplomat yesterday. The State Department didn't confirm it, but the Kremlin did. And so they have been setting the agenda here to try to move forward on a few things. However, when the president's national security advisor was asked point blank a few days ago here at the White House, what's the agenda? What's the top of it? What's issue number one with Vladimir Putin? He said there is none. He said the president's going to talk about whatever he wants to talk about. Unclear what that's supposed to signal other than not boxing the president in. But if there is sending a clear message, that wasn't one that was delivered from the podium of the White House. So everyone is going to continue to ask, is he going to push Russia to back away from Syria's dictator Bashar al-Assad? Is he going to draw a hard line, say you got to stop interfering in Europe and Ukraine before I lift these sanctions? Is he even going to bring up the issue of Russian election meddling, something that we know the president has raised doubts about himself, even though all the major intelligence agencies came to the conclusion that this did happen? He is continuing to deny that there was any collusion, I should say, on the part of his campaign associates with Russia, and that is the subject of that FBI ongoing investigation. So the pressure is really on. It's going to be fascinating to hear from the Russians and then hear from the Trump administration what was accomplished in that meeting.
Yeah, it definitely will be fascinating. You talked about how it will be scrutinized down to the body language. I expect there will be half hours dedicated to that first handshake because, you know, that's always so telling. Margaret Brennan.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Margaret.
Thank you.